Hi, everybody. I wanted to welcome you to our Museums and Race virtual conference. I'm Stacy Mann. I'm a member of the Museums and Race Steering Committee, and I'll be hosting today's session. Before we get started, I want to share a little bit about Museums and Race for those that are new to us. Our collective work is designed to invite a more nuanced museum discourse, specifically around the ideas of oppression, so identifying the complex and often unacknowledged ways in which systemic structural norms influence our decision making, so that cultural institutions present themselves in a way that are unacceptable and exclusionary to many people. We also look at privilege, the pervasive assumptions of whiteness and wealth, which are counter to inclusion and diversity, and in fact, continue to perpetuate white cultural dominance. And thirdly, intersectionality. So understanding how race intersects with gender, social justice, class, and socioeconomic status. We're very excited that everybody's here today, and we'll get started. So first, when we generally run programs with partners or at conferences, we collaborate with local Indigenous communities to develop a land acknowledgement that's specific to our location. Obviously this year we're virtual, and everybody is joining from different places. We have individuals from across the globe that have signed up, which is very exciting for us. So instead, we're asking that people take a moment to reflect on the history, the social circumstances, and the personal experiences that bring us to this moment. So I would like to respectfully acknowledge that my city of Philadelphia is situated on Lenape-Hoking, which is the ancestral and spiritual homeland of the Unami and Lenape. So we want to ask that everybody just take a few minutes to consider whose ancestral home is occupied where you now reside, and what circumstances brought you to this moment, and how do you carry your ancestors with you? So we'll just take a few minutes for that, or a few seconds for that. Thank you for that. As a participant today, we ask that individuals be present and bring your full self to this discussion. Within our group, we encourage radical candor, having fun, and also expressing appreciation. This is a space where we do encourage people to take risks, but we also ask that people be respectful in their interactions with one another. And we just want to make it clear that these are guidelines for participation here, and we do reserve the right to remove anybody that is disruptive and disrespectful within the space. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand things off to Paula Santos, who's going to kick off the next session, Museum Workers Fund Relief Fund, Museum Worker Solidarity in Action. So take it away.
So hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen so you can see our slides. So can you see that, our panelists? Yes? Okay, great. Today we're going to talk about our Museum Worker Relief Fund. My name is Paula Santos. I am currently the Senior Manager of Learning at Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art here in Chicago. And I feel very strong, I'm really repping Chicago today, and you'll see why. This work was really born out of the activism I see here, and it's very inspiring. So with that said, I want to hand it over to the person who I can see on my screen right here, who's Christian, if you would like to introduce yourself.
I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, and work at the Phoenix Art Museum as the Public Programs Manager. I got involved in this project after learning about it at a mass action meeting, and reached out to Alyssa and Paula to learn a little bit more about what was going to be happening with it. What drew me to this project specifically, I very recently had years of layoffs at my museum, and it felt like kind of the least that I could do to try to like help in some way was to participate and to figure out like, how do you do this? So yeah, and then I guess I'll go next to me is Anniessa. So maybe, do you want to go?
Peace, everyone. Hello, my name is Anniessa Antar. I am column mini, and I was inspired to join this project as a participant and kind of co-creator with Mass Action, and learned about it through there. And yeah, it felt like it was a very practical and applicable way to show up in actions of solidarity in this time. And next on my screen is Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Greenberg, and I got involved with museum worker activism because I was a member of a labor union when I was a grad student worker at a university museum. And I experienced firsthand the impact of member-driven collective action and solidarity. So I will pass it over to Hannah.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Heller. I'm calling in today from New York. I am a no longer working contractual museum educator, working mostly in different art museums in the city. And I want to echo people's thoughts about experiencing this pandemic from a position of privilege and wanting to give back something, and also feeling just really helpless in the beginning until Alyssa and Paula brought this project that they were thinking about to a mass action group phone call, and it was like a light that went off for me. It's a way to do something in some kind of concrete way that felt good. I'm gonna pass it off to, should also say Latanya Autry is also a panelist on this call, and she's working her way in, and maybe we can do her intro later. Who else? Are we missing anyone? Okay.
Hello, my name is Kate Swisher. I work in exhibitions registration at the Field Museum in Chicago. So representing Chicago hard on this call with me and Paula. I got involved just through Alyssa and Paula, kind of reuniting a lot of the original members of Museum Workers Speak, looking to address the same issues that keep popping up over and over in our field, but that are especially present now in the pandemic. And it's been really great to have somewhere to put kind of all of that frustration and, as Hannah was saying, that feeling of helplessness. It feels really, really good to organize and to connect with people and support our fellow workers. And is there anyone else on the call who has not been introduced yet?
I think we're waiting for Latanya, right? So when Latanya comes on, we'll definitely, introduce her as well, Latanya Autry. So in the interest of getting us going and to get to more of the conversation portion of this, this is our session overview. We have divided up the 40 minutes or so. We're going to be talking into the different components of our worker relief fund, Museum Worker Relief Fund, and you'll hear from each of us in our particular areas. And we will end on, we'll start in origin and we'll end in high dreams and alternate futures for museums. So we will get going with Alyssa first with the, oh, hold on. I was told to do this. So this is a mutual aid museum worker solidarity project, which means that all of us who are in this field have a part to play in this. Now, every single part that you play in this doesn't necessarily have to be money, you know, like we're all making, you know, not super great wages, especially if we're on the sort of more front end public facing side. But we really, really want you to tap into those relationships that you have had at your museums. Reach out to people who are not following us on Twitter, the people who work in your visitor services, facilities, cafe, retail, membership, security people. Throughout this process, one of the biggest things we have talked about this week and the first week of our application opening is like, who is this message reaching? Who considers themselves a museum worker, period? And how is our message being translated, you know, outside of this circle of very, very, very highly professionalized people? You know, we have a handful of PhDs in this call, master's degrees. So please take a moment, whether it's during the call or after the call, to brainstorm how you can reach those members that you know would benefit from something like this, and you know that we can really bring to the forefront here. But with that, I believe Alyssa.
Okay, so Kate and I are going to be presenting the first section on the history of museum workers speak. I also want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Toledo, Ohio, which is located 10 miles from Maumee, Ohio, which on August 20th, 1794 was the site of the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which Native American forces, including 1,500 members of the Shawnee, Delaware, Miami, Wyandotte, Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, Mingo, and Mohawk nations resisted their American colonizers. So Kate, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say, again, I am calling in from Chicago, and I acknowledge that I'm a guest on this land, the traditional homelands of the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, and also the Miami, Anoka, Ho-Chunk, Sac, Fox, and Menominee. Chicago is located at the intersection of several important waterways and sits on the shore of Lake Michigan, a name derived from the Ojibwe word Michigama, meaning large water. For millennia, Native peoples have been the caretakers and protectors of this land and its waterways. And today, Chicago is home to the country's third largest urban American Indian community. With that said, Alyssa, did you want to talk a little bit about how we each originally got involved in Museum Workers Speak?
Yeah, I kind of said, you know, my piece already, that being part of a grad worker union at a university museum was really what opened my eyes to the power of the people. What about you?
So for myself, was really fortunate to be pulled into that project in April 2015 by you, Alyssa. At the time, I had definitely personally experienced a lot of the issues that we were looking to tackle, you know, low-paying jobs and just struggling with figuring out how to make a living in a field where it didn't seem possible to make ends meet. I had experienced, you know, fellowships that didn't have health insurance. I exhausted savings trying to pay a heating bill one winter. I just found it really difficult, and I couldn't reconcile the discrepancy between the prestige and wealth of the museum world that I saw around me with, you know, donors and board members, in contrast with the conditions that this world required its workers to accept. So there was just a lot of cognitive dissonance going on there. And then I had also become aware increasingly of the lack of diversity around me, and was starting to connect the dots between that and the labor conditions that I saw. So a lot of people around me in museums had alternative sources of wealth that allowed them to pursue this channel and those who didn't were really struggling. So that was what motivated me to become part of Museum Workers Speak.
And so the motivation of how we all got started was the AAM 2015 conference theme was about the social value of museums. So a few colleagues got together and submitted a proposal about museums' social value and their stated commitments to social value and unjust working conditions in museums. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, our proposal was rejected. And so to us, that only highlighted and emphasized how important it was to have this conversation. So what we did was we found an art gallery in Atlanta where the conference was being held, who agreed to donate their space to us for the evening. And we held our originally planned session as a rogue session, and it had a pretty exciting social media moment. And honestly, way more people attended our session because it was a rogue session than maybe they would have if we'd actually had a session at AAM in the first place. And the session had a live tweet chat component that allowed people to participate virtually, those who couldn't make it to the conference. So I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the many, many collaborators from coast to coast who made Museum Workers Speak's original iteration possible. Those names are Monica Montgomery, Jillian Reese, Rose Paquet, Adrienne Russell, Adrienne Turnbull Riley, Allie Hartley, Ansley Simmons, Alyssa Frankel, Grace Torres, Jennifer Keem, Johanna Fassbender, Latanya Autry, Laura Callan, Lena Reynolds, Lisa Gilbert, Margaret James, Jacqueline Kelly, Margaret Middleton, Mariella Russell Pritikin, Portia Moore, Nina Pelaez, and Teresa Martinez. So together we were able to fight the stigmas around discussing labor and working conditions in the museum. We were able to push back against do what you love culture and sacrifice culture, where we're expected to pay our dues, and create a space for this very taboo conversation to take place. Museum Workers Speak held monthly Worker Wednesday tweet chats with Museums Respond to Ferguson as our model. And we use social media as a virtual space for building solidarity.
So wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the structure of Museum Workers Speak. I think on the previous slide, it showed the number of regional groups that developed out of this initial effort. And I think what's really astonishing about this is that so much of this organizing took place online in virtual spaces. So a lot of it was on Twitter via these tweet chats. We had people starting to contact us about starting their own regional offshoots, which we did in several places, as you can see here. And I should mention this slide is from our AAM 2016 presentation, which it's kind of interesting what started off as a rogue session in 2015, you know, outside the confines of AAM, turned into such a hot topic that we were eagerly invited to present at the conference the following year. So the slides you're seeing are from that. So, and I should note too, it was a decentralized model. You know, it was a lot of us just talking online, a lot of email threads, and very decentralized. So like we didn't take any kind of brand ownership over the name. When people wanted to organize their own regional offshoots, you know, we said, run with it. So a plus side of that is being very nimble and allowing people to kind of do their own thing and address the issues that are most important in their particular region. A downside of it is that this is all work that was being done by volunteer activists. So this is, you know, a lot of us are working full time. Some people are working 2 to 3 jobs. And it was very difficult, frankly, to maintain the momentum of what we started initially in 2015. You know, by, I would say, 2017, it was really, most of our work was happening in online spaces on social media. But yes, okay. Just checking my notes.
So we also wanted to acknowledge some of the other groups that are aligned with Museum Workers Speak in doing this work, and that includes Museums and Race, who's hosting us today, Museum Hue, the Incluseum, Mass Action, Art and Museum Transparency, museum labor unions including MoMA Local 2110 and Tenement Museum and the New Museum, Museums Are Not Neutral, Look at Art, Get Paid, and Visitors of Color.
Absolutely. So we also pulled some of these quotes from our original Rogue session that started it all, that just kind of demonstrate what the conditions were in the field when we started this. And, you know, a lot of it sounds awfully familiar today. You know, I have a master's degree, but I'm earning intern money. I fought tooth and nail with my boss to get an intern a $1,000 stipend. I'm tired of being the only Black person I know in museum leadership. You know, these were all issues that we were seeing. Unpaid internships being a particularly onerous barrier to entry in the field for folks who couldn't afford to do something like that, to work for no pay. A lot of part-time, temporary, and contract jobs. You know, I can say from personal experience, it's very difficult to build savings when you're moving across the country every couple of years. Saturated job markets, museum studies program churning out so many graduates every year into a market where there just weren't a lot of open positions. The cost of advanced degrees, such as those master's degrees, you know, folks going into debt to get these degrees that were essentially required for a lot of entry-level positions, making it virtually impossible to enter the field without going into debt. And then two, absence of salaries and job postings, and employers asking for things like salary histories, which has been shown to impact women and people of color the most. You know, these structural inequities just perpetuate when your future earnings are predicated on your past earnings. And then just these huge gaps that we were seeing between entry-level staff and the highest paid leadership. So obviously these are all things that are still true today, especially in terms of lack of diversity in museum staffs. The sort of famous Mellon diversity survey that happened in 2015 found that 84% of folks in roles of intellectual leadership at museums were non-Hispanic white. They did that same study in 2018. It was still around 73%. So the progress has been incremental. These are all issues that we are already facing, and intersectional issues as well, race, class, and gender. And again, one of the things that we strove to point out when we came together was the fact that museums are increasingly interested or professing an interest in diversity, inclusion, equity, but some of these labor practices run counter to that. And so just kind of highlighting that, that sort of conundrum. And in conjunction with that, trying to push for greater institutional self-critique. I think museums only like to address these kind of hot topics when they feel like they're making progress or they have something they can show for good publicity. It's a lot harder for museums to actively acknowledge their complicity in these systems and to kind of be transparent about the problems that they're kind of facing and working to address. So that's one thing that's important to this movement, is getting institutions to accept criticism and self-criticism.
So thank you so much, Kate. yes, the similar issues we're facing today to 5 years ago, lots of them. And now it's our next portion with Anniessa Antar.
Hi everyone. Latanya, or wait, someone was saying that my audio is not working. Is it okay now? Yeah? Okay, thanks. Latanya, I saw that you just jumped on. Do you want to introduce yourself before I get started?
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, sorry to be here late. I've been having a lot of computer issues and stuff, but I'm very happy to be part of this discussion with you. I'm Latanya Autry, and I'm dialing in today or wherever. Dialing in from, I guess it's called dialing in, from Cleveland, Ohio, and working here at a museum and doing other things, and really happy to be part of this discussion with you and part of this group with Museum Workers Speak. So that's it. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Latanya. So hi everyone, my name's Anniessa. I'm calling from Minnesota, which is occupied Dakota and Ojibwe land, and whose peoples who have walked this land before us and continue to be its most knowledgeable caregivers. I'm about 10 miles away from Bidote, which is where the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers conjoin. And one translation in Dakota is where two waters come together, and it is a sacred place. As a settler on these occupied lands, I'm very grateful to be unlearning and relearning our ways of knowing today with you all. So I am going to talk a little bit about the structure of mutual aid and community care and why we thought this was kind of the structure that we wanted to move from. And as Kate and Alyssa talked about in the previous section, you know, pre-COVID, these things were definitely happening. All of this structural inequity is happening, and capitalist structures, you know, have predictably continued to fail us in COVID and before. And I think that this pandemic has really pulled back the veil and exposed a lot of structural inequity in super clear and cogent ways. And there's a group called the Emergence Network, and I really like this question that they pose. What if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? So I think there's been a lot of discussion around, you know, going back to the way things were, this understanding that we are, you know, forging new ways. And so centering mutual aid and community care seem to be more important now than ever. And of course, these are not new concepts. I mean, this is a Black, feminist, indigenous, queer, crip, prison abolitionist, healer, organizer framework that we are trying to elevate and make sure that it becomes the way that things are moving forward. So mutual aid, mutual aid, you know, really centers this concepts of generosity and empathy and reciprocity and solidarity, and in a way that isn't top down. It's coming from this kind of horizontal collective way that we understand how we're all connected. It's rooted in the collective, and it's not based on this kind of individualism, which racialized capitalism really wants us to remain individualized. So we can understand how our individual actions make up the whole and the ways in which we are interconnected and stronger because of the webs and networks we build, but really honing in and understanding the ways that we're all interconnected. And I really like this quote by Mariam Kaba, who is a prison abolitionist. And she says, one time, this isn't from an interview with Eve Ewing, and she talks about how her dad was talking about the interconnectivity of everyone and relation, and that everything worthwhile is done with other people. And I really, thanks to, I think Paula actually shared that with me. So thank you for that. I really love that. And I think that that kind of sums up this idea of community care too, which for me, community care really is a rejection of the, you know, the sake of maintaining status quo. It's rejecting this expediency, this way that things need to happen in a particular linear order. And it centers justice, it centers the well-being of the whole, it prioritizes relationships and this interconnectedness. And it really does not, you know, it celebrates difference. It doesn't say that difference is a scary thing or something that we need to, you know, separate on a basis of. So while the mutual aid maybe isn't the solution for, you know, undoing all of capitalism, it is certainly a project towards building these imagined futures that we're talking about in these ciphers with Museum and Race, and that we'll, you know, talk a little bit more together later. And we want to hear definitely from you. What is, you know, the imagined future? What are we building towards? What are we moving towards? And what does solidarity look like in action, which this aid, I think, definitely, you know, it alludes to. So I'm gonna pass it along to Paula to talk a little bit about how we establish this mutual aid.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm glad that we've talked about sort of the beginnings of Museum Workers Speak and also these ideas of mutual aid that have been in action in communities, Black communities, queer communities, and that have such a rich history that can really inform us. And I think that's where I wanted to begin and say that in all of our conversations, especially as we were establishing this fund, is we started talking about how do we look towards the outside of our institutions or our professionalism to really, it's almost like realizing that there are other models out there and we don't have to be trapped in our own model. We can be something else. And a lot of this has to do with need and resilience. And the people who are doing mutual aid are people who, you know, perhaps through a charity model, you would say, oh, those are the people who like really, really need it. But we're here to help each other out. And I was raised very much in this idea that we are the only way that we are going to be okay is if we are okay together. So that's really where I want to start, where when this crisis started, when the pandemic hit, one of the first things that had to be in place for us to begin organizing is personal safety and security. So I will speak for myself, and you know, our panelists can speak on this point as well. Is my family, two of my family members lost their jobs almost immediately as soon as closures started. And, you know, I work in a museum and a small one. So there was this question of, well, what was going to happen? Like, am I going to lose my job? Or are we going to be furloughed? So I needed to make sure that I could be the safety net for my family and that I could still have some type of income in some way. And I am married, so there is a second income in our household. And once I was sure that, or, you know, relatively sure that our safety nets were in place, you know, through family and such, then this organizing could really flourish, because I wasn't in my own mind in crisis mode. So I wanted to put that out there. So when we began talking about this, I started talking with people maybe a couple of weeks after closure. So in Chicago, that was around March 15th. And the more conversations I had, you know, and they were very informal, the more energy there was around this project of, yes, you know, there are many people in this field, whether they're in management or visitor services, who are just, you know, really wanting to feel like we're breaking some silence. You know, institutions really, really rely on the silence of workers at pretty much every level. And Alyssa was the person who reminded me that, you know, we have Museum Workers Speak, and that Museum Workers Speak could be activated for this fund. Now, when we started talking, I talked to Mass Action, and that's how I met quite a few of you who are on this call. We decided to start talking weekly about explicitly outlining the values of our fund and what were going to be the guiding principles of our fund. That meant that if we were going to use the mutual aid framework, there's some very particular things on there, like, for example, about means testing. I love that Miriam Cabo was brought into the discussion, because I really love reading and hearing what she has to say as a prison abolitionist, because she really talks about, like, believing people when they say that they need something. And, you know, at least for myself, that has been, you know, really formed in this sort of nonprofit model, you know, where we're constantly trying to figure out what is the most high need population. It is really radical to think, like, if people tell you that they need, then they need. And that, believe me, I think now that we're in this process, maybe 6 weeks, that has been like a really huge topic of conversation on our end. Like, what does that look like when it's in action, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So in order to, like, establish the quite literal structure of how everything was gonna be, I am so lucky to have such a just a powerful network of information sharing here in Chicago. I talk to union leaders. I talk to people who have managed mutual aid funds for artists or for other activists. I talk to people who have done immigration work. They were very, very giving in the types of information, the challenges, the information they would share with me, the time they would put into this, you know, just to make sure that I was, you know, like, really, really learning at a very rapid pace of what does it look like to do this type of organizing, especially when it comes to money and funds. So Museum Workers Speak, I think I'm so glad that Alyssa and Kate talked about how the structure has been for Museum Workers Speak, because, you know, that sort of agility of being decentralized and being in different places and being volunteer run is, like, amazing for advocacy and organizing. But when it comes to financial management, it becomes a lot more difficult, because financial institutions want to verify that you exist, first of all, which means social security number, tax ID number. And then there's also questions of liability and tax liability. So initially I was thinking, you know, we're just gonna do this like if we were running a bail fund, you know, someone will PayPal us money, we'll have a PayPal fund, and then we'll just, like, distribute that way. Now, the issues with that is sort of the upscaling of it. There are many organizers that I've heard from where their PayPal funds get frozen, and then it's like a whole disentanglement of getting those PayPal funds out. Another thing is that we do have a Museum Workers Speak PayPal, which we will use, but again, that legitimacy that financial institutions ask that PayPal account is under my legal name. So I didn't necessarily want to ask all of you who are on this phone call or, you know, nationally, PayPal museum workers speak with, you know, my legal name attached to it. I think like that, again, is, you know, these questions of trust and transparency come up for us. So then this idea of fiscal sponsorship and fiscal hosting has come up as well. And again, this is where we've run into issues because Museum Workers Speak has been a volunteer-run organization. We're not an LLC yet, although I think that once we like kind of, you know, get over this first hump of the mutual aid project, I think I might reach out to everyone and be like, we need to be an LLC, because when it comes to tax liability and all those sorts of issues, being an entity, a group, is helpful for just managing and moving money around for bookkeeping purposes, etc. For example, I had to learn this, one of our members connected me to her, you know, fiscal sponsor, and they were, you know, so happy to host us. But because we weren't, you know, it wasn't Museum Workers Speak, you know, as an entity, I would have sole proprietorship of, you know, this fund, the money coming in, which then put me in a tax situation which I was unclear of. And then also I had to manage my own capacity of like, do I want to untangle this tax question right now, like right this second, for a fund where we know there is a need. We did eventually get fiscally hosted by Open Collective Foundation, who does this work for several groups where they do hold money and then they do send out checks. And we have that just in case an organization or someone reaches out to us who wants to donate to us through a 501c3. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the one that we have, or at least I know I have the capacity to run right now. And then there's GoFundMe, which is really the way, you know, after going through this process of several weeks, you know, GoFundMe exists for a reason, and it's useful for a reason. And one of the biggest ones is that you can have a team of organizers on the fund. So all of our names, you know, whoever wants to be on that page, all of our names could be on there. That's a really big thing for me. I don't think that I want to be so transparent about who's on this project. And the other thing is that GoFundMe doesn't give me a 1099. It marks it as gift. Now we're gonna see next tax season what happens, but they, you know, as opposed to a fiscal sponsorship, which would have sent me a 1099, GoFundMe doesn't necessarily operate that way. So that's the way we ended up going. And Alyssa and I are the people who are managing at least the bank account side of it. So the level of trust in the group has to be really high, you know, for us to manage money around, and especially the ask that we have, which is $50,000. And in small donations, I think we've raised about nearly 23 with about less than 400, you know, smaller donors. So it's like a high level of trust that all of us are saying, yes, like I want to be part of this through GoFundMe, PayPal, or through this fiscal sponsorship. There has to be this collective agreement on internal processes for fund management. And that sounds like really not sexy at all, but it reminds me that whenever I read about like activists, artists or something in the 60s, they went to so many committee meetings, you know, like that's where they all met each other, talking about, you know, processes and things like that. And even though it doesn't sound all that sexy, this collective conversation that we have at least once a week on how things are going, what are the pressure points, are there any can of worm issues happening, I think has only made this process so much better. And it really expands, I think, for me, it definitely has been like a huge political education on how to organize. And, you know, it's a model that I had seen, like I said, in prison abolition work, in bail fund work, in, you know, union organizing work. And I really was thinking, what if we could use this framework for museum workers at this time when the field is being completely decimated? So that is really my portion of it, I believe. And I'm going to pass it over to Christian, who will talk about the application.
Yeah, and kind of, I guess it's really a good like next step after hearing from everybody else on really the idea of like just radical trust was a big part for us, was that we really wanted people to, if you feel like you need the funds, you apply. And we did our best in creating language that really dictated who should be applying for those funds, which have been highlighted here. But specifically, we want the folks who are receiving this that are really, really need it, that have been living paycheck to paycheck prior to this and in this moment, if they are still employed, those that don't have generational wealth to lean on, those that if they don't have enough money for the next 3 months, like you need this more so than someone who might have a savings account. So in interest of not limiting anyone from applying, there's no means testing, but we do have just this pretty thorough list of ways of being able to contribute. And then in another way of being able to actually select the winners, we're going to be doing a lottery system. And so with that, it's kind of again, another layer of taking away any means testing and kind of just letting it exist. So it's a random lottery that will be generated, and then those folks will be announced as the winner or emailed individually. And then anyone who's still in the fund will be in the next round of applications as well.
On to social.
Yeah.
So Latanya and I are representing our social media team today. I'm looking at the time, and so we're going to try and do this pretty quickly. We want to talk about some specific strategies and ideas for where we're going to go. What's been really helpful so far? I should say, first of all, that neither of us are trained social media people by any means. So it's been a steep learning curve. But one thing we've learned along the way is to have some text copy and graphics ready to go before going live, and should take this opportunity right now to call out Margaret Middleton, who has helped us so much, like can't even talk about, taking graphics and making them like a million times better, our website as well. So thank you so much to Margaret. And having that ready to go is really helpful, especially because things started to move really quickly. And we were talking before how we cannot even believe that it's only been 7 days since we started. I was like, that cannot be true. It's been at least 6 years, because every day has felt like new vital information that had to be pushed out. So if you'll notice, a lot of our posts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have been very information heavy, because I just think it was important to convey, this is what we are, this is what it is, this is why you should give. And then in the following days, pleas for money, gratitude for donations, announcing when our application is open, when we hit our first $10,000 goal, I think a lot faster than we thought we would. So really every day has been a new like information project. But now that we have that information foundation established, our goal is to start having a little more fun with it, kind of lend our museum workers speak identity a little bit of flair and kind of represent us. Like we're a fun, cool group of people, and I think our social media presence can reflect that a little bit more. We're hoping also to onboard more people. So definitely email the museumworkersspeak@gmail.com. Email if you want to contribute at all, but social media I think is a place where more voices the better. Why not? Fun, personality, more people, and including testimonials from some of the applications, obviously with people's permission, but they really present a super poignant face aside, a personal side to all the data that we're collecting and the pain and trauma that we're experiencing in the field being perpetrated by our institutions and so-called leadership. So look out for that. LaTanya's gonna take it away with some more ideas about outreach.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So hi again, everybody. I felt so rushed when I came on late, but I just want to say I'm really glad to be here with you today. And I mentioned I'm here in what's now known as Cleveland, Ohio. I'm actually on the ancestral lands of the Erie and the Haudenosaunee Confederation and other Native people who've been in this area. So, you know, thinking about our social media team right now, it's Hannah and I actually was involved a bit, and then I had to work on some other projects. And what I've been finding, so for about a week, Hannah's been really hitting hard on creating a lot of the posts and stuff. What I would think would be ideal for this kind of thing, you know, when you have people who are, you know, passionate about this stuff, but also have other jobs and things that they're doing and activities, ideally it'd be good to have a team of at least 3 people is something that we've been finding out, because somebody may have to, you know, like I mentioned, step out to work on other things, and then one person is being kind of like slammed with trying to get a lot of content out and posts and such. So it'd be good to ideally have about 3 people, but even more, like 5 people or so. And I'm thinking a core group that would be putting a lot of posts out, but there could be other people that would be invited in to kind of guest. And what we're thinking about are people that already have a built up platform where they have been working on social media, you know, using, you know, Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, whatever. What I've learned, and, you know, what all of us have seen, is that some people are really more interested in like maybe Instagram or on Twitter or something. And it's really great if your team can have people that have that kind of varied background, and then they can just kind of take a platform and just roll with that because that's their area of interest and what they know of. And they already have developed a following. And so it's really great if you have your social media team, but that you also have people who can, sorry about that. You have your social media team, but also your whole team kind of steps in and, you know, will do stuff like repost and be sharing on their networks as well. So it is that core group, but it's really everybody is a part of it. And so that's just the way to keep it more robust. And when we're thinking about social media, it's ideal if people also are really being social on there, so that you're not just putting posts, but you're actually talking with people. That seems to really generate a lot more interest and activity, and, you know, making it really personal and human. Something else I wanted to highlight is that there's also the old school social media. I think, you know, when we put this together, we were thinking very much of like these digital platforms of, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and that's where we've been targeting right now. But really getting the application, information about the application, and out to everybody, especially as Christian was highlighting, you know, to people who really, really need it, actually might not be that they're really looking at stuff like on Twitter and Instagram and so forth. It might be that old school social media of using the telephone, if you remember that old thing, might be more of where we need to be also putting some attention. Not that it's an either or, but, you know, if you really do have a particular focus, like on, you know, Black and brown poor communities, it's important to use forms of technology that will reach those people. And so using the phone, also maybe email, but I think definitely the personable aspects of just, reaching out to people through the phone and any other contacts is really important.
Latanya, if I'm going to step in here just to kind of give a little bit of a picture here between like the application language and some of this outreach stuff, is that one of the conversations we've been having, especially recently, now that we've launched, now that we have seen the attention and who is this messaging reaching, we're, and I'm just gonna speak for myself, I'm at this point where I'm like really examining, well, can I even reach like the gallery attendants I work with, 2 years ago? Or what about like the facility staff that I was like really friendly with at my last job? Like, how do I, those types of relationships that we have had in our museum work that have been so, important in just even getting like a room set up, or making sure that your museum like runs, like those relationships, like they should be tapped into right now for this type of organizing, and I think that when we speak about mutual aid and we translate our application in Spanish as well, is this recognition that museum work, yes, it's, me getting my very expensive degree at Bank Street, but museum work is also the work that is literally going to allow us to open the door whenever that is, the sanitizing, the, putting the tape down on the floor, that we're all gonna have. So this solidarity is truly across the board. And I would love, and this, and we've all talked about this, I'm not the only one who's saying this, but like about how we are all so integral to the museum running and operating and serving people or showing works of art, however way we want to, think about our work. So, the outreach part is truly like, what are those relationships that we have? How do we now really tap into them, moving forward, towards more of a movement level? So now it's Alyssa, and sorry, I don't have the names of who's talking, so that's why I'm like, Alyssa, but yes.
Okay, so I know time is running out, so we're going to go quickly through this section about our research component. So much of Museum Workers Speak has happened in these kind of whispered conversations among colleagues in private. And unfortunately, despite widespread calls for transparency, discussing labor and museum and working conditions hasn't become less taboo in the fields in the years since Museum Workers Speak got started. And so incorporating a survey into our application process is a strategy to build a collective, to build solidarity, to organize people through the understanding that we aren't experiencing this alone or in a vacuum. Now, we're not ready to share initial findings yet from our survey, but we do look forward to reporting on the patterns as the project moves forward. But we do want to share what those questions are. So we have questions around museum employment, demographics, and some short answer questions about how you're feeling in the museum right now, what your vision is for the future of museum spaces, and what prompted you to apply.
And yeah, we decided to include these extra questions as a project of archiving and really documenting right now. Data about museum labor and demographics is not super readily available or accessible. And just a note about this idea between quantitative and qualitative, like Hannah and Latanya, I'm very new in the kind of world of collecting data and doing evaluations and stuff, but quantitative data is really the kind of institutional language. It's the logic of white supremacy culture. It's the logic of institution and empirics. So we have to capture that, but at the same time also elevate qualitative analysis, understanding that testimonials and lived experience sharing about it is just as important and builds solidarity, and that this could really, you know, counteract these narratives in the field. This idea, like what Alyssa was talking to previously about doing what you love, or this, you know, being grateful to be in these positions, this, you know, the scarcity mindset around not being able to have abundant ways of resourcing workers, all of the gatekeeping that comes with it. So just, yeah, we wanted to archive and really capture as much as possible that we could use to talk about, talk about what's going on at this time.
And we hope that our findings can be activated towards advocacy, that we can publish material that can be shared with museum workers at all levels, board members, elected officials, community leaders, and museum audiences, and that we can use this to leverage this towards accountability and political education around museum hierarchies and identity and labor and how all of those intersect.
Yeah, and this really, oh, go ahead. Oh no, it also builds solidarity and strength among museum workers during this really critical moment, which brings us to our next point about, you know, the theme of this, of Museums and Race Ciphers, is imagining a radical future. So we really wanted to spend a bit of time and answer some of your questions right now around what are our high dreams. I mean, it could be kind of wrapped up. I know we don't have so much time, but talking about what our high dreams are, what are our most radical imaginations of what museums could look like. Will they even exist? Is, you know, museum abolition a part of this equation? What is the future action? How do we move forward with these principles in mind? So I think, well, I want to hear, sorry, I kind of, do we all want to share what our radical imaginings are? And then open it up for the Q&A.
Well, let's hear from our moderators, because I think we want
So
to leave some room. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been collecting some questions that I'm happy to kind of share with the group. We're just finishing pulling them together. So I know there was one question that was asked early on, and I think it was answered in the Q&A, but it would just be helpful to have you maybe address it to the group, since folks weren't necessarily following that. But a question about what are some of the museums that are moving in the right direction or showing leadership in this front, you know, specifically to the idea of being really cognizant of, you know, of workers and of income inequality and of all of these kind of issues, and trying to find equitable solutions kind of in this moment.
Museums are a little bit tough. I want to share actually something that I shared with the group maybe a couple of weeks ago, is that so the financial realities of museums are what they are. You know, I think that usually when layoffs and furloughs and people are upset, there's this kind of a level of condescension sometimes that gets thrown around, that, you know, us educators just don't understand the realities of the budgets or something, which is not necessarily the truth. So one of the models at the Los Angeles Times, so media has been, you know, facing, you know, staggering layoffs. What the union at the LA Times has done is a work sharing program where they agreed as employees that they would work a certain number of hours, and they would make up their salaries through buying into the unemployment system. So there was an agreement in, like, we're not going to lay people off, but we're going to use other, you know, institutional options in order to weather this crisis. So some, you know, and that really kind of sparked something in me, because there's been so many, you know, and the other people have stories to tell, but there's been so many instances where like cuts haven't been progressive. They've been like across the board, right? And, you know, 10% to me is a lot, making what I make versus someone who makes, you know, Glenn Lowry's salary. So yeah.
Another practice I saw was, this is, I think, the Oakland Museum. This was from a while back, and I really haven't kept up with the story, but the I don't know who actually, I would say, of course, the director in a way, but their institution anyway, instead of, you know, going in right away with the idea of like, we have to cut our frontline people. What they did is they made cuts across the institution by reducing, I think it's hours. I don't like to misquote, but I haven't read the article for a while. I think it was earlier in March or something. I think it's Lori Fogarty, who's the director of the Oakland Museum. So there's a whole story out there about that. And I thought that was really quite admirable. I know that also Mass Action put out a really important equity statement about ways to reduce hours or due to pay reductions, and having that be based on like salary level. And so people who make, you know, $20,000 wouldn't take a 20% hit if the director's taking a 20% hit. So, you know, that actually I think is a really important kind of model that's out there that we can be using. And I haven't actually seen, I don't know of a lot of museums doing it, actually. I don't know of any museums using that, but I think it's an important, there's obviously important models out there.
Unmute myself. So one of the other questions has to do with the run by and for the community. It says, I feel like we should demand greater accountability from the institutions we work with. One thing I'm curious about are some strategies you may suggest for how we can ask and organize for matching funds at places where we may still have some kind of relationship or some publicity or solidarity. Plus, we often talk about a museum as a monolithic entity, but it is further comprised of board members, directors, and donors. How can we hold those actual people accountable? I'm thinking of DTP protests at Whitney Biennial. Candors was held accountable, at least to a certain extent. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that on.
What I'm hearing in that question is kind of connects to a question that I saw from Alex about like what happens next. This is mutual aid. It is what it is, and it's great, but I think we'd all agree that it's a Band-Aid. All the mutual aid projects in the world can account for pain and the violence happening right now, and has been happening for forever. And so I don't have an answer, but I feel like one thing that I've been thinking about in terms of visioning and imagining next steps is it sort of is feeling to me like we're all like waiting around a little bit for a person or an entity or something to tell us what is this next thing that we're all going to do. And then, you know, we're all on board, but we have to determine what the next thing feels like the big question mark. The problems are clearly articulated, and more so, I think these next step conversations are happening in lots of different places. So I'm interested in Museum Workers Speak or Mass Action or whoever it is taking on a role in maybe collecting some of these conversations and getting as many people around the table as possible, and having a multi-prong, like these people are targeting board members, these people are thinking about a membership organization, these people are thinking about unionizing or something like that. But I'm curious about what our role can be in having that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like the question is maybe getting to the tension, right, between the accountability side of things, right, wanting to like drive the issue, drive the questions, right? But then there's like the flip side, which is how do you get the buy-in, right? Like they're like parallel paths, right? And that's kind of, I think, just the overall tension with any of these dialogues is some organizations, they've already got the buy-in at the, for the most part. So it's been easier to kind of manifest changes, right? Whereas, in place where that's not happening, how do you develop that accountability metric, to then move towards buy-in, even if it's with more of a cudgel than a carrot.
I think also, and I think this is why organizing is so important, is that we have the strength in numbers. There are more of us, and there are a lot of people and not only in this field, just like in the country, that really rely on the silence, and that we will just, take it. So I think one of the really difficult, and I'm just speaking for myself, one of the very difficult parts about this work is that when you use your voice, then you are also putting yourself in a situation where you may be perceived as an agitator or someone who won't be a team player, and I think that has been really difficult to navigate in my own career. But also I have seen many other people navigate that as well. So there is great risk to doing organizing work, whether it's this work here in our field, or it's, you're doing like prison abolition work, or you're doing like police accountability organizing work. Like, there is risk to it because it is important and you are holding people like literally accountable, and there's going to be pushback, right? Or else why would you need that accountability? So.
And with that, I'd like to add, thank you for, going there, Paula. And with that, I think all the time about Audre Lorde's statement, your power though is in speaking. The systems are set up, they're designed to keep us on a leash and to keep us shut up and just going along. Even the ideology of how the institutions operate, of telling people like the whole language of like, not a team player, not, an agitator. It's like, hell yeah, I'm a freaking agitator. I'm going to mess this up. I came to destroy. So that is like the position I'm taking. I'm like, yeah, I am all of those things. That may mean there are people who are really going to want to stay the hell away from me. I'm still going to just keep pushing and doing my thing. We need a lot more of us to start speaking up. And like Paula said, there's way more of us than there are of them. And I think this is also about connecting with people outside of the freaking museum. Museum people really operate in a very isolated way and love this kind of language of inside the museum, outside the museum. We really need to be busting past that. We need to be collaborating with people in other sectors as well. And that is how we start really building, power and showing that we can, talking about how do we influence boards and stuff like that. If we are all shut up and being quiet and only talking to one another on the sidelines, in the institution, but like quietly, we need to be busting out. We need to be talking to people in healthcare. We need to be talking to people in the legal, areas in our communities, like all over the place. That is how we start really shifting. A lot of the changes are really going to have to be being united with people who do not work in a museum. I think that is also how we start building to change the culture, because a lot of the people who are really working for change within the museum field tend to be people who are not in like top quote leadership jobs, and often are getting oppressed in really severe ways. So anyway, I don't want to take up all the time, but I just wanted to add that.
Okay. Thank you, Tanya. So we've got 3 more questions to address. So the first one is, has the Museum Workers Speak, have you guys reached out to the ACLU to ask if there's a way to keep protecting workers that are historically oppressed? So have you reached out and tried to create any of those partnerships? It might be a quick yes or no. I don't.
No, we're not. We're not at coalition building yet, but I think that we should be amping up for some coalition building.
Okay. There were a couple of other questions that I'm going to kind of combine. So that kind of gets to like the ethics of the job situation in our industry. So one part of it is like, how do we solve the job saturation market, right? We want to encourage people, especially people of color, to get into the museum, but there aren't that many jobs. And on the flip side, you know, we have this saturation and there's like a personal responsibility kind of side to this conversation that happens around, you know, if you were going into museums, like, did you do your research? And like, did you know that it was going to be a low paying thing? Did you know when you were getting your museum studies degree that you were going to be coming into a saturated market, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which only then goes to like create even like higher hurdles to engagement and access and et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, there's kind of this ethical piece to this. And that's one of the questions here is like, how are you guys thinking about that, or, you know, going about tackling that and addressing it within the work that you're currently doing? Does that make sense? I'm mashing up two questions.
I will never dissuade anyone from joining, especially, you know, I've talked to, you know, a few women of color actually recently about joining the museum field, and I will never dissuade them of that. But I think one of the things to remember, and, you know, in our conversations, especially thinking about, you know, models outside of the museum field, is that and this isn't only museums. You cannot go into this work thinking that you will fall madly in love and someone will fall madly in love with you and sparks are going to fly forever, and that, you know, it's just going to be this magical job, a unicorn job, because that is not the case for any industry, and especially not this one. And I think that Latanya, in one of our previous conversations while we were talking about the fund, you know, she mentioned, and you know, you can talk about this, Latanya, about how thinking of ourselves outside of the institution, but developing a practice, you know, like what we do, where I consider myself an educator, like that practice is who like I am. My job being the whatever manager or this or that, like that is a job and a title, but my practice will continue being my own. And I think there has to be a clarity in that, in going into these fields, because if there isn't, it's like, I think, was it Anniessa that said that she's emerging, and I'm like, I feel like I'm withered. But, you know, like, it's just going to be this like heartbreak. And I feel like there's so much heartbreak currently. Yeah.
And I think it's because we love the field and we love this work that we're so focused on changing it. You know, I disagree with a lot of the foundational premises of the question, Stacy, the second one that you brought up, you know, that master's programs have to be expensive. I look forward to living in a world where higher education is free through a public university. You know, I look forward to a transformation in museum culture in which you're not required to have, you know, degree upon degree upon degree in order to be eligible for a museum job. And this is coming from someone with a doctorate from a public university. So, you know, if you treat this issue with an abundance mindset, you'll see that there's many more ways that the museum field could look than what we're stuck with right now.
That is such truth. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to like add, you know, we were talking in a previous discussion as a group, we were talking about that high dreams as Anniessa was like, you know, getting us there. We haven't, you know, had time, but it's always like, that's like the big thing. I feel like for this question that these two questions, there's what this thing is, the way the sector is right now. The way the sector is not good, and is not the way that we should see the future. We need a lot more visionary people. We need to be looking at activism, not to just be looking at the field. Like, it's important to be, you know, to see things for what they are and analyze it and be able to break it down, but not to be like just seeing that is the only way that this is. There is more, and there's much more that we can be making happen, as Alyssa was just saying. So I think we really need to like be changing our mindset. And I would say, you know, to me, like, yeah, going back to how Paula was talking, I don't I don't put my identity as the institution, as being a museum person. My identity is I'm someone who loves art. I love culture. And that is something I can bring to any kind of space and area. So I think this moment that we're in right now, this moment of crisis, is also, and it's also should be provoking us to really think hard about what we want, what we want to be, what we want to create, and not let's just get back to the usual. The usual is violence. Let's use this as an opportunity to be reimagining and to just create the future we want.
Excellent.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, this kind of leads into another question I saw in the Q&A that maybe you were going to address. But this kind of next steps after mutual aid, which, we're in this moment where, what do we do? What are we doing? What are we building right now for this future world? And I do think we need to get quite radical in the ways that we're thinking about how to move forward. Reformation is not really an option. We really need to be transformative in this moment, taking cues from, again, prison abolition. But I do think that, conceptualizing there's a lot of comments in the chat about, how are we organizing with our unions? How are we organizing across intra-institutionally? And it's interesting, we had the conversation while we were talking about these high dreams, what would it look like to have a worker-owned museum, to have a cooperative museum where not only the people who are working within the space, but also with the community, with people, what if your membership model was a cooperative? I do think that this is the time to start thinking about different ways of funding outside of, the industrial complex of the nonprofit, to be able to really represent and showcase the things that you care about, that you value in your place. And that might look like moving outside of your current institution, or is it a transformation of that institution? Is it something new altogether? But the most important thing, like my comrades are saying here, is that it does have to be a collective effort. It has to be together, and that's kind of that's the strength that we have. It's definitely leveraging the power of the people to be able to do that. So I just feel like we're in a really great place right now to start dreaming this, to start putting it in place, and to start making demands, and to do it in a collective way where it is decentralized, which I think Museum Workers Speak, is a really great example of this decentralized, horizontal way of making decisions and pushing things forward that we could bring to each individual institutions that, are all connected in this network. So I feel like there's energy there, and these talks this whole week with Museums and Race, I've just been so inspired by a lot of what folks are doing. I think the energy's there.
Excellent. I think we've got time for just a couple more things. So the first is, what is your impression of the new Museum Hue AAM partnership, given AAM's somewhat problematic history in terms of addressing DEAI and related issues?
That's a question.
That is a question. Right there in my list of questions.
I think that people should reach out to Stephanie Cunningham. I think she can speak for herself and talk about her reasons, at least I know her, and, she's always been someone who is aware of the issues. She's not living in another world. So I don't know. I think, at least for me personally, I'm sorry, Hannah, to cut you off, but I'm not necessarily looking towards the institutions that have already proven that they're not necessarily our best way to move our field forward. So it's like, you know what? I'm going to stay in this lane that's like super fruitful and like, yeah.
Anyone else? Excellent.
just-
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I just super quickly would like to say, I think it is helpful to have people working both within and outside of these traditional structures, because AAM does wield an enormous amount of influence. So I think it is good to have multiple kind of tactics for moving them forward. You know, if that's some people in partnership and some people pushing from outside, I think all the better.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think the last question, I think this is probably a good place for us to stop. So in addition to requests that were made for like resources and references, which I'm hoping are maybe accessible on the website, maybe, or will be very soon, if not already. Excellent. So there was a question about, should we try to create unions and work in our internal museums or organize between museums like Chicago? What is more important right now? And a follow-up to that, you know, someone else felt like this was the question that needs to be answered. Is it about unions? Is it about unionizing? Is it about a membership org? Is it something else entirely? Like where's the best place to put our efforts right now and put our energy?
I feel like it's a both and. You have to do the internal organizing, the like political education, the reading. Mass Action is really great. It has a toolkit with a bunch of resources and ways to start having those conversations if you've never had that with your institution. So, you know, just getting people on board within your institution, and then eventually, you know, maybe that will lead to union organizing, but then also being in touch with local networks, so other museums in your city, in your county, in your region, and then building power from there. But it's a both and. We can do both. I'll post the Mass Action Toolkit.
Yeah, I just add, I would say, this is a time for us to accelerate and keep going. If you haven't been part of this kind of movement, start somewhere. But if you have, push even harder in different areas. If you've been more quiet, maybe this is the time to speak up. You know, like this is a time to kind of do multiple things, not think that there's going to be one answer. The answer is unions. The answer is this. The answer is that. The answer is probably a whole lot of things, and we need to just keep doing stuff. We need multiple types of actions happening, and we need to keep being in dialogue with one another and supporting each other. And as we were highlighting before, also thinking outside of this, quote, museum sector, like the way that this is shaped right now. We need to think more broadly.
I think the silos have been working really well for us. So, like, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. It's my default. It's my default position. Anyways, so this has been really wonderful, and I want to thank all of you for being here and participating. Participating in the session, participating in the conference. I mean, this is our inaugural kind of virtual conference for Museums and Race, since we weren't able to do the Transformation and Justice Lounge in San Francisco. So it's been kind of a learning process for all of us. There's just a couple, I lost my slides. Where did my slides go? Hold please. Thanks. There they are, okay. Technical difficulties. There we go. So we have a couple, well, actually we've got one session left this afternoon. So it's on the walls, in the halls, diversity and inclusion in exhibitions and staffing. So we hope you're able to stick around for that. And just a reminder that we're recording these sessions, and we will have them as well as transcripts available once the conference is over, and you can stay tuned to our social media channels and we'll make announcements. We just want to, again, thank everybody for their support. We are 100% volunteer-led organization, and we rely on the community support to help us with programming and presentations at conferences. This is the first virtual conference, and we really look forward to people's feedback to kind of help us shape the future of what we do really throughout the rest of this year, is my guess. And the donations that were collected for this conference will continue to support that volunteer work. And we're really happy to share a percentage of the proceeds this year with the Museum Workers Relief Fund, in appreciation for the work that you all have been doing to kind of support the field in this moment. So thank you again to everybody for attending. And we hope to see you again in about a half hour for one last cipher. So that's it. Thank you again to everybody. Round of applause. Appreciate it. Thank you.